Just a few days ago, a brave Chinese photographer threw away his future to show the world a single image. Outside the airfield of Shenyang Aircraft Corporation, that photographer spotted an extraordinary sight, an aircraft known officially as the JXDS, but better known in global military aviation circles as the J-50. Since it was first spotted in late 2024, the J-50 has been the subject of intense speculation, thought to be a fighter aircraft so advanced it could put America's F-22 and F-35 to shame. As for the photographer who spotted it, we don't know his name, and we likely never will, but we know that when he spotted the J-50 on the ground, he leapt into action. He scaled the airfield's fence, snapped a photo, and, well, now you're looking at it. So here's what this single still image can tell us about China's J-50, what it can tell us about Chinese military aviation, and what it can tell us about the nation that's poised to become the next global superpower. Now, before we can analyze this image of China's secretive J-50, we've got to have a word about sourcing. Now, we here at Warfronts, we're not experts on Chinese military aviation, and nor are we experts in distinguishing between these sorts of highly advanced AI-generated images that Chinese state authorities are able to create and the genuine article. We are, however, able to access and benefit from the expertise of people who do specialize in those areas, and according to those experts, via the global press, this image does appear to be genuine. The first person who shared it online, the German but China-based military aviation researcher Andreas Rupprecht, is known to be a reliable source on these matters and also provided context that the image was sourced from a Chinese photographer who was rumored to have been caught climbing the fences at Shenyang Aircraft Corporation. Now, we do, of course, have to provide the caveat that in cases like this, it's good to keep a healthy bit of skepticism. But for the purposes of analysis, we're going to operate today on the assumption that this image is genuine and that it really does depict the JXDS aircraft, to be referred to for the rest of this episode as the J-50. As for the original photographer, we've got no information other than the rumors that he was captured, but we'd expect that if this was indeed an image obtained without the Chinese government's approval, then the rest of that photographer's life is almost certainly going to be quite painful for as long as that life lasts. Now, even though this image is a vastly better look at the J-50 than anything the Western world has seen before, it is not our first inkling that the aircraft exists. Instead, the J-50 was first revealed to the world unofficially in December 2024 when it was depicted in video and still images captured by civilians on the ground in China. At that time, the J-50 was only seen from the underside, depicted in what appeared to be a flight test and tailed by a known Chinese fighter aircraft, the J-16. The J-50 wasn't the only brand new aircraft to appear at that time. Instead, the world was focused on a companion aircraft, a larger, heavier fighter that was unofficially dubbed the J-36 by the Western press. More detailed images of the J-36 have come out since that time, but the J-50 has been far more elusive until today. Neither aircraft has been formally acknowledged by China, and the J-50 has never been pictured or referenced, even in grainy civilian photos, by Chinese state media. Of course, the world wasn't totally in the dark about the aircraft's existence, and thus military aviation analysts were able to come to a few basic conclusions about what the J-50 probably was. Most important, it appeared to be a highly advanced combat aircraft likely to fall within the category of a sixth-generation fighter jet. While fighter generations, they're not a standardized metric, they are a useful way of understanding the advances in combat aircraft over time, and a sixth-generation fighter would exist at the cutting edge of today's military technology. A fourth-generation fighter is the boilerplate fighter jet, something like America's F-16, Europe's Eurofighter, Russia's Su-27 or MiG-29, Sweden's Gripen, or China's J-10. A fifth-generation aircraft incorporates a stealthy design and highly advanced onboard avionics, America's F-22 or F-35, China's J-20 and J-35, arguably Russia's Su-57, and upcoming jets like Turkey's Khan and South Korea's Boramae EX. A sixth-generation fighter, however, that goes a step further. Even better stealth technology, artificial intelligence and data fusion technology, new generation engines, potential directed energy weapons like lasers, and the ability to function at the center of a real-time battlefield command network. Although the United States, multiple European coalitions, and a couple of other nations have sixth-generation aircraft in development, no production-ready sixth-generation fighter has ever been unveiled to global audiences. Although it hasn't yet been confirmed by Chinese media or any publicly acknowledged intelligence, the J-50 is thought to be a sixth-generation fighter, meaning that China's murky test flights of the aircraft took on a whole added level of global relevance. If the J-50 was really all it seemed to be and was flying alongside another sixth-generation aircraft in the larger J-36, then that would put China ahead of Russia, Europe, and even the United States in the global aviation arms race. Okay, so when we turn to these new images of China's J-50, a few features really stand out above all the rest. Most obvious of all, it doesn't have a tail, either in a single-tailed design or with two diagonally slanted tails, as is common among stealthy fifth-generation aircraft in service across the globe. The J-50 features an exceptionally sleek design with no notable features that protrude or interrupt the surface of the aircraft in any meaningful way. It features a cockpit and a distant shape known as a lambda wing instead of the backward swept or delta wings that you would expect to find on most fighter aircraft. At the tail, the aircraft features twin engines with an exhaust that's surrounded by finely serrated spiky edges. And on the whole, it looks one part F-22 and one part alien, doesn't it? But although it's fairly straightforward to describe how the aircraft looks, it's much more important to discuss what its appearance means, and for that, we've got to do a bit of a deeper analysis. We'll start at the very nose of the aircraft and work our way back, where first we find the canopy. On the one hand, it's important to note that this aircraft has a canopy at all, meaning that it is a manned aircraft designed to be flown, at least sometimes, by a single human pilot. When it was first spotted, there was some speculation that the J-50 was an unmanned aircraft meant to fly as a loyal wingman drone or as an autonomous combat aircraft. Later images seem to show that it did have a cockpit, but this latest revelation provides all the proof required, assuming, of course, that the image is real. It is also notable just how deeply positioned the canopy is within the aircraft, something reducing visibility in the event of a dogfight, but making it more stealthy, and thus suggesting that it may not be meant for close air-to-air engagements, but instead to launch long-range air-to-air weapons while coordinating a digital battle space. Helping that conclusion along is the lack of a second seat for a co-pilot, something that would, in this context, suggest that the plane might be meant to operate for longer missions, or that it would be expected to perform its battlefield coordination functions while also maneuvering and engaging in dynamic flight. A single pilot can coordinate battlefield assets in that way, but they'll be more effective in doing so if their aircraft can hang back, stay hidden, and spend a few minutes on autopilot while they handle other tasks. Underneath the cockpit, on the underside of the fuselage, is a small protruding glass bulge that seems to house an electro-optical targeting system. That's a type of digital sensor that provides a high-quality, real-time view of targets, identifying, laser designating, and tracking those targets over time, whether they're on land, on sea, or in the air. Essentially, it's a situational awareness tool. That's worth noting that most of the time an electro-optical targeting system would need to operate relatively close to its targets in order to track them, suggesting that the J-50 could be meant to come closer to the front line. But there's also the possibility that the J-50's onboard avionics could simply be better, as one might expect from a highly advanced aircraft, or that it could interface with other piloted and unmanned aircraft that have their own onboard sensors. On top of the fuselage, behind the cockpit, we can see other small bulges, although those aren't glass-coated and their purpose is harder to ascertain. According to Tyler Rogoway of the Warzone, they could be home to a distributed aperture system or something similar. There's basically a set of sensors that gives unobstructed infrared vision in a massive sphere around the aircraft, making it able to track incoming missiles, aircraft, and other critical information. Moving rearward, the aircraft features a pair of air intakes of a type that's shaped like trapezoids and referred to as a diverterless supersonic inlet, or DSI. And that's a type of inlet that's quite similar to those used on the American F-35 and several types of other Chinese aircraft, granting a better stealth profile than traditional air-sucking inlets. Behind that, the aircraft seems to feature onboard weapons bays, closed compartments, where they can house air-to-air, air-to-ground, or other types of munitions while safely hiding them, and thus the aircraft from radar. Atop the fuselage, the aircraft seems to be equipped with a retractable device known as a Lundberg lens, which can be deployed in order to reflect radar coming from external sources. That feature makes the aircraft less stealthy when it's deployed, not more stealthy, But that's for good reason. When the aircraft is flying in friendly territory, it makes the plane's position easier to spot, meaning that its own country won't risk losing sight of it. Meanwhile, if it's flying in range of another nation's radar, or especially if it's traveling in another nation's airspace, it can deploy that lens in order to both display its position as a non-hostile warplane and obscure the true extent of its stealth technology so that it can't be properly studied. Then there are those unconventional lambda wings and the broader aerodynamic design of the aircraft. Because it lacks a tail, this is a fighter jet that would be highly unstable by default, especially when it's flying slowly or trying to maneuver aggressively. Now, in order to help fix that problem, the aircraft has specialized wingtips that can swivel up and down, providing the aircraft with greater stability when they're angled downward and making it faster and less observable when they're angled in line with the rest of the wing. One element of the aircraft's design that we already knew from prior silhouette photos, but that deserves to be mentioned here, is that it does not feature any canards, the front position winglets that some aircraft have just behind the cockpit. Those are a prominent and controversial part of China's mass-produced fifth-generation fighter, the J-20, and could assist the J-50 with its stability. So it's interesting to note that China chose to forego that in this design. Now, moving all the way to the rear of the aircraft, the J-50's relatively small size combined with twin engines suggest an aircraft with a relatively short range, meant to fly hard and fast, but probably to burn lots of fuel as it does so. It's important to note that this might be the result of China's engine designs, still in need of considerable improvement, and that the long-term plans for the jet might include a switch to a single-engine design when a suitably powered option becomes available. But if not, then twin engines would suggest that in-flight endurance is less of a priority than thrust, and possibly the ability to sustain power to high-energy intensive onboard systems. On the engine exhausts, the J-50 features serrated edges around the exhaust, a stealthy setup that enables two-dimensional thrust vectoring to redirect the thrust of the engines themselves, thus forcing the aircraft into harder maneuvers or assisting with takeoff and landing. That's likely to be an especially useful feature for the J-50, since between its smaller size and the upcoming J-36, and the fact that it's produced by the same design bureau that made the carrier-capable J-35, the J-50 may be slated to eventually serve aboard Chinese carriers. With that tip-to-tail analysis in the books, we can take a step back and get a better look at the J-50 in order to analyze it in several ways at once. Specifically, we're going to see whether it can answer three distinct questions about the J-50 and, in a way, about the Chinese military. What does the J-50 design tell us about its tactical purpose? What does the J-50 tell us about China's air strategy and its future air wars? And what does the J-50 tell us about China's military readiness? Now, tactically speaking, we've already addressed some of the characteristics that would seem to define the J-50, an aircraft meant to operate at a high thrust and high power across relatively short distances while overseeing and controlling battlefield operations without getting into the chaos and confusion of a dogfight. As a highly stealthy single-seater aircraft, it's likely meant to perform at least some operations from beyond visual range, relying on its onboard standoff weapons or a combination of other manned or unmanned aircraft to actually go into hostile airspace. That said, the J-50's lack of a tail and its other highly stealthy features would suggest that it may be designed to fly into enemy territory without being stopped, since it seems to be built in a way that would make it considerably more stealthy when viewed from the side and perhaps even the rear than most fifth-generation alternatives. As a relatively short-range carrier capability would make the J-50 a far more capable asset when it comes to actually projecting China's power abroad, but it would most likely be constrained to battles in areas where airfield or carrier access is relatively secure. That could come during a war against Taiwan or any of China's neighbors or nearby adversaries, but China's relative lack of air-to-air refueling capability plus its complete lack of stealthy refueling aircraft would suggest that China probably isn't planning to keep the J-50 in the air for longer sustained operations over hostile or disputed airspace. In that regard, the heavier J-36 would probably be a better fit. In fact, the J-50 and the J-36 seem to neatly skirt around each other's capabilities, suggesting a pair of sixth-generation aircraft that are meant to complement each other, both in individual air battles and in China's overall arsenal. Where the J-50 seems to prioritize power and maneuverability, the J-36 seems to prioritize endurance and payload capacity. Where the J-50 may be carrier-capable with a single pilot, the J-36 seems to be fully land-based, with a pilot and co-pilot sitting side by side. It's worth noting that a third potential tailless combat jet was recently spotted back in August, but the details on that shadowy aircraft are sorely lacking at this time. In terms of ground strategy, China's emphasis on producing a fighter aircraft like this and producing what seems to be multiple sixth-generation fighter aircraft at once would suggest that China's focus is on advancing technological capability as fast as possible. That's not something China would expressly need to do if it planned only on going up against nearby adversaries like Taiwan, but those capabilities would be very important if China was planning on a sustained military engagement against a nation like the United States, Japan, South Korea, or even Europe or Russia. At the same time, the observable features of the J-50 don't suggest an aircraft that's meant to wage an intercontinental war, or if it was, then it would need to be built in considerable numbers and operate off of far more aircraft carriers than China will have anytime soon. Indeed, the J-50 seems to come with the sort of range that would make it ideal for fights closer to home, perhaps bridging the strait between China and Taiwan, crossing the East China Sea to hit South Korea or the southern islands of Japan, or squaring up with American assets stationed on Okinawa. Places like Vietnam, Myanmar, and perhaps most importantly northern India would also be entirely within range. And if the J-50 truly is a sixth-generation fighter jet, then that's just more confirmation of what we've known about China for some time now. That this is a nation focused on building a highly integrated, high-tech air arsenal combining manned fourth-generation aircraft, stealthy fifth-gens, unmanned collaborative combat drones, unmanned reconnaissance assets, and more, all controlled in real time by a sixth-generation overseer. And finally, the apparent status of the J-50 speaks volumes about China's military-industrial complex and its capacity to design and build some seriously advanced technology. Over the last couple of decades, there's been plenty of talk about China's theft of advanced intellectual property and data from Western nations, and deservedly so, but where China got its expertise, it doesn't really matter if China can use that expertise to design aircraft like this. The J-50 is regularly being flight tested, it's clearly capable of flying and landing repeatedly, and that alone is a major testament to China and its pilots. The aircraft appears to be thoughtfully designed, quite functional, and machined to at least a decently high quality, and there was one other feature of the aircraft that we didn't mention. The lack of an onboard air data boom, something that's previously been spotted on China's flying J-50 model. That's a fixture meant to collect important data during testing, and if it's not present on a flyable model, then one of two things is true. Either that boom has been removed from China's single-flying prototype, and they've gotten the air data they need, or China has multiple flyable prototypes of this thing, of which this image might depict a more refined version than what China previously had been flying. Once a design like this is ready to go into production, China's military-industrial complex can handle the rest. China's already producing between 100 and 120 copies of its stealthy J-20 aircraft this year, with that rate of production only set to increase, while it also opens up production lines for the J-35. China can build high volumes of advanced stealth fighters, and if and when this design is cleared to go operational, it could start to roll off the production lines in small early batches very quickly. As for how many China could produce, it's difficult to say, and it's not clear when or if China would reveal what the aircraft is truly capable of. But perhaps the real question is a really simple one. How many of these aircraft would it take to decisively shift an air war over Taiwan into China's favor? And if we suggest that China could tip the scales with, let's say, half a dozen or 10 or 15 of these fighters at their disposal, each coordinating massive aerial contingents over different zones of the battle space, then how quickly could China get there? And could China get there quickly enough so that America's F-47, Japan's Tempest, and other adversarial sixth-generation fighters couldn't be there to match it? Beat America to the punch on a sixth-gen aircraft, and China may very quickly begin to realize some of its greatest ambitions. Thank you for watching.